Well, the protesters say they are determined to stay until President Mubarak quits, an announcement they thought was coming Thursday night.
I had already announced before that I'm not going to run in the upcoming presidential elections. I had already given a lot to this country for more than 60 years of my effort, whether during the years of war or during the years of peace, and I'm going to adhere to this decision. I, at the same time, had adhered to the issue of shouldering the responsibility in defending the Constitution and the national interests of the people until the transfer of power.
Well, as crowds chanted in outrage, screaming and waving their shoes in the air as a sign of disrespect, the president went on to say he would delegate powers to his deputy, according to the stipulations of the Constitution. He also said Egypt would not be followers or take instructions from anybody. Well, it's helpful perhaps to get a bird's eye view of the landmarks in Cairo that we are closely watching, especially today. Of course, there is Tahrir Square. Those are the crowds that we're seeing there that have gathered there in the thousands and the throngs. That is the main location for the protests. It's also known, ironically, as Liberation Square. Well, up the Nile River just a bit, Egyptian TV, it's considered the mouthpiece of the government, where protesters are trying to expand their territory. A splinter group of demonstrators tried to march to the presidential palace, but the army has the entire place surrounded with tanks and barbed wire. The roads around it are shut down, except for the main road that runs to the airport. It is just after 2 p.m. in Cairo. We want to get a check now what's happening there with our senior international correspondent, Ben Wiedemann. Ben, we've got the pictures there to help illustrate what is happening where you are. Tell us what you're sensing.
Yeah, Monita, what we know is that Tahrir Square is so jam-packed today that what we have is an overflow of demonstrators going down the street behind me, past those Egyptian army tanks, to the headquarters of State TV and the Ministry of Information. And of course, the State TV is, as you said, considered a mouthpiece of the regime, even though it's tempered its message somewhat, does continue to toe the party line, so to speak. So what we see is, I'd say at this point, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people, either in front of the Ministry of Information and State TV or trying to get through this army barricade that you're seeing right now. Of course, there are soldiers, there are tanks and armored personnel carriers surrounding the ministry, in addition to barbed wire. So it doesn't appear that, at least at the moment, the demonstrators are going to get inside State TV, as they in fact did on the night of the 28th. But I do believe, Monita, that this may be one of the new focuses of the protest movement.
Well, Kate Baldwin is in Washington. She joins us now live. And Kate, we understand that the Obama administration said that the Egyptian government, that Mr. Mubarak, had not gone far enough.
It was really interesting, Monita. I was traveling with the president yesterday when he went to Michigan and he made those remarks that you just played right there. A markedly different tone later on that evening, once the president had heard the message from President Mubarak. Really, the statement that the president put out, unusually lengthy, I will say, and it was almost came across as like a point-by-point rebuttal of President Mubarak's message. I'll read you in part what it says, really calling for clarification, if nothing else. The statement in part says, too many Egyptians remain unconvinced that the government is serious about a genuine transition to democracy, and it is the responsibility of the government to speak clearly to the Egyptian people and the world. The Egyptian government must put forward a credible, concrete, and unequivocal path toward genuine democracy, and they have not yet seized that opportunity. I think you can clearly understand that President Mubarak's message was not well received here at the White House. We'll be watching very closely, Monita, to see what, if anything, the president says today, what his advisors, what his press secretary will say today, see how, what, if the tone shifts. Up to this point, as we continue to say, as the unrest has continued, this White House has been very cautious in its tone, taking as best I could say is kind of a hands-off approach, saying that the future of Egypt is in the hands of the Egyptian people. We're seeing in this statement a bit of a shift. The president really putting it back on President Mubarak, saying you need to clarify to your people as well as the world what you're going to do, if you're going to do it, and if you really mean it. And it's really putting it back on the president of Egypt to make some very clear and concrete changes towards this progress, towards democracy that the Egyptian people are calling for. We'll be watching very closely to see what President Obama has to say today.
There in Washington for us, thank you so much. A massive crowd jammed into Tahrir Square Thursday night, anticipating President Mubarak's speech, like many around the world. But when he finally addressed his country, his message enraged, where Egypt's economy is feeling the pressure of events. Getting back to the daily life is easier said than done right now, because people are determined to stay on the streets. But what kind of impact is that having on the country's economy?
Quite a dramatic one right now. The estimates are they're losing about $300 million a day. So there's the pictures in Tahrir Square, which is one thing, thousands and thousands of people, but then the spillover that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 days. Industrial action in the Egyptian heartland here, basically. Textile workers, ceramic workers, agricultural workers, all protesting, putting down their tools, not going to work. Some of the business people I spoke to said that up to 10% of the total population of 80 million people are either protesting in the major cities or not going to work at all. So you can imagine the spillover effect. Another CEO of a major hotel chain in Sharm el-Sheikh, I said candidly last night after the speech, where do you stand in terms of occupancy right now? He says, this is prime season. I should be at 75 to 85% occupancy. If I was going to tell you the truth, he said, I'm at 6 to 7%, and this is prime season.
That's 6 to 7.
6 to 7%.
Wow.
And I think if we can bring up this graphic that I built on the cash earners of Egypt, I think it kind of tells the story of where Egypt needs to make the money. But tourism receipts bring in $13 billion a year. So being conservative right now, you could have to say at least a third of that's going to go away, because you have 4 or 5 months in the summer it's too hot. You're looking at the autumn, so they do need to settle this by the autumn to get the tourism bookings back up again. Remittances probably won't be effective unless there's a spillover into the Gulf states, because that's Egyptians sending money back to the country. FDI, I would imagine they're going to be hit pretty hard. I can't imagine global investors looking at this destination right now and saying, I'm going to plant $2 or $3 billion into the country. Just being very candid. And the Suez Canal, right now everything's okay, but you and I had a conversation beforehand. There's protests on the streets of the port of Suez, again, because of the industrial strikes. This has not spilled over to the canal so far, but you can see it's worth $5 billion to the Egyptian economy every year. So what if the protests do spread to the canal? And that's a big question I'm sure some of the shipping agents are asking right now.
Right now we're seeing here that these are reports, again, that's unconfirmed right now by CNN, but there's talk of some 30,000 people are out now in Suez protesting against the Mubarak regime. The realistic thing is that when you see people on the ground, we're seeing the throngs of people on the ground right now, and that really means, as you're saying, people are not working, people are not feeding their families, businesses are not running right now. So how long could this go on for? Well,
if you think about it, if it goes on for 4 months, and I did a calculation, kind of back of envelope, but a realistic one, you've taken $300 million, it's about 20 to 25% of the Egyptian economy. So a shrinkage of the economy if this carries on for 3 to 4 months of up to 20%. And we can't lose sight of this. The unemployment rate's been 10% before. This doesn't mean that people all go back to work and then they all have their jobs. Some of these companies are going to shut down if this carries on for a long period of time. And a fair rule of thumb for the region is that the youth unemployment is usually double the rate of the general unemployment. So you're looking at the people that are on the streets, they're out of a job. A quarter, 20% of them do not have a job. And I don't think this is going to improve because of this. And the other thing people are not talking about right now is just what is the spillover? This is a similar challenge in Algeria. It is a similar challenge in Morocco. There's been similar challenges in Saudi Arabia. Nobody wants to talk about it, but it clearly is a concern. Is there going to be copycat protests, and does that escalate as time goes on?
Before I let you go, I just want to quickly ask, you've been to Egypt many, many times. You've been to Cairo. What do you think when you're looking at what we're seeing on our screens right now?
Well, it's funny because I've told my colleagues I've been there about 50 times, and I've been over that Passover and into the square. It's mind-boggling, the stance that everybody's taking. And to hear people say, I want to die to make sure these reforms go through, is heart-wrenching, because they haven't had a fair shake. The per capita income hasn't been there. And the economic reforms, although impressive, did not trickle down, and they happened too late.
Death or freedom, that's what they're saying.
Yes,
John Defterios, thank you very much for that. You're watching World One live from London. Now, many see the relationship between Israel and Egypt as a barometer for peace in the region. The Israeli Defense Minister, Ehud Barak, said Thursday any changes that take place in Egypt were up to the Egyptian people to decide, according to their own constitution. We want to get more now on Israel's reaction to what's happening from CNN's Jerusalem Bureau Chief Kevin Flower. Kevin, what is Israel saying today after what they heard last night? Mr. Mubarak saying he will transfer power to a vice president that we know has had good relations with Israel at this point. Are they still on tenterhooks?
Well, Monita, what Israel is saying today is the same thing they were saying a week ago, the same thing they were saying 2 weeks ago, which is basically nothing. There's been no official reaction to the speech by Hosni Mubarak from the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We did hear those remarks from the Defense Minister Ehud Barak, not really saying much, and he made those remarks while on a trip visiting the United States. But basically, it's the same situation. The Israeli government is in the same situation as much of the rest of the world is, watching these events unfold on television and not knowing what's coming next. It's very hard for them to sort of be out there commenting on this for a number of reasons. And it's something that the Israeli Prime Minister alluded to earlier this week when he made comments to some visiting European parliamentarians. And he said this, he said, "I don't know what will happen next in Egypt, but from Israel's perspective, our interest is clear. Our interest is to maintain the peace that we have enjoyed for 3 decades. And that, of course, is the overriding concern, is going forward, will that peace treaty, that 30-year peace that's been in place between the two countries, will that hold? And it's an open question mark here, because no one knows what's coming next in any way, shape, or form, Monita. So those are really the big question marks here. But again, the same questions that have been being asked for some time. Everyone is just waiting on tenterhooks, as you said.
We want to bring you some information that's coming in right now, but we have to be very careful because this is not information that has been independently confirmed, but there are rumblings, and we want to share this information with you, of course, as developments come in. But there are rumblings and there are rumors from many different reports in Arab media that are saying that President Mubarak has left Cairo. Now, just a caution, we have seen these types of stories several times over the last few days, and even if it was true, we wouldn't want to speculate on what his leaving the capital would mean. Again, CNN has not confirmed these reports, and we do want to be very, very careful. These are rumblings that we're hearing that Mr. Mubarak has left Cairo. We don't exactly know where he's gone at this point. We want to keep you up to date on any of the developments that are coming our way so we can share them with you as well. But again, just being as transparent as possible. This has not been independently confirmed. These are just rumblings that we're hearing and reports that are coming in from Arab media as well that Mubarak, Hosni Mubarak has left Cairo. Of course, once we get confirmation on anything, whichever way, we will bring that to you ASAP. For now, you are watching World One live from London. Coming up next, we take a look back at some of the most iconic scenes from more than 2 weeks of this popular protest. You're watching World One live from London. I'm Monita Rajpal. CNN's coverage continues, and if the pictures that we've been showing you all day from Tahrir Square, this could be a pivotal day in Egypt's history. This is CNN.